Hello and welcome to Manibil. This will be part 30 something of my deconstruction of Keith Frankish's lecture series on illusionism. And we are, or I am, about 34 minutes, 33 something minutes into lecture 4, where we are dealing with something he calls is phenomenality a datum, or rather the datum idea of phenomenality. Okay, with no further ado, I think we will just jump into it and see how it goes.
Here's a suggestion along those lines. Imagine a group of people who I've called Mephistos. I'll explain that in a moment. These are humans just like us, they have minds just like ours, and they live in a world just like ours, maybe in this world. The only difference from us is that they don't conceive of their mental lives in the same way that we do. They don't, when they introspect, they don't think of themselves as acquainted with mental qualities. When we talk to them about the qualities of experience and about the way that it feels to see red, the feeling of pain, the mental quality of pain, what it's like to taste coffee and so on, they're a bit puzzled and they say, well, I understand that there are qualities involved here, but these qualities...
Now, I want to point out he is illuminating you of how he's putting the cart before the horse, right? What it's like to taste coffee. That's backwards, right? If you think about it, and ultimately I might be wrong about this, right? But illuminate me then, please, right? But the taste of coffee, no, he has a taste experience that he calls coffee. It's not the taste of coffee, it's the taste that he calls coffee, right? He's not saying, this is coffee, I'm now going to taste it. Yes, he might have a memory of prior experiences or qualia, phenomenalities, or whatever term he will use, of the same kind of object that he expects to have a particular qualitative experience, which he calls coffee, right? But the experience, the qualia, came first in order to be classified as coffee, right? So you can't. It's a matter of using words, but because human beings tend to put the understanding of how things are going on from the word perspective rather from the experiential perspective, right? Because words are those we read and hear everywhere and we express ourselves and so on. So because the words are put together this way, there's a risk that we might understand how things functions because we're using the terms this way. So when you say you're tasting coffee, you are not really tasting coffee. You have a particular experience that you are classifying as coffee, or that you have a prior experience of, that you have memorized, which you sort of can refer to. When, if I'm thinking about the taste of coffee, I can sort of imagine the feel or the taste or the quality of that particular taste in my mouth, right? Not least because it's not too long ago since I have a coffee, but that doesn't mean that when I go to my coffee, I am tasting coffee. Coffee is a terminology used to describe that particular qualia, right? So it's like he's certainly, or surely, I would better say, right? Because I don't like certainty. I would love there to be certainty, but it's impossible in my opinion, right? And I argued for that a lot of times before. I'm actually thinking about making a cohesive a video on certainty, or the impossibility of certainty, right? Okay. So it is still, it's clearly all these indicators that he's suffering from the naive realism. In the way he puts together the words and so on, it constantly illuminates me that he's suffering from this illusion, right? That he is actually accessing some external world when, obviously you need to open your eyes and ears and so on in order to have any kind of access to it, right? So that there wasn't any experience that came before your present experience other than the memory of prior similar experiences, right? But that doesn't make these memories of those experiences something that is beyond or comes before your experience. It's all a reference to your present or prior experiences, right? So you're sort of locked within the experiences. If he doesn't understand this, I promise you, nobody in the future, whenever this is settled, right, it's like there's a consensus on how to understand this experience, right? Now, I know it goes against, common thinking, right? That, that's how you grow up. You learn to understand that experience as the actual outside, right? But when you think about it, it's impossible. It doesn't work. It becomes, if you approach it this way, it becomes paradoxical, right? In my opinion. Okay, let's head in.
Is that we experience the qualities of things in the world. When I see an apple, the redness of the apple, the red quality of the apple, that belongs to the apple. It's not in my mind. If I try to attend to my own mind, I don't find any redness there. No, the redness is just out there on the surface of the apple.
Whoa. I need to hear that again. I was a little...
Try to attend to my own mind. The redness of the apple, the red quality of the apple, that belongs to the apple. It's not in my mind.
What? What? Have I misunderstood what he's saying? Because in those, no, I can't drag those illustrations out. That is from the prior lecture, right? But he presented a gray apple outside this skull, and a mind or brain was supposedly a representation of in the encompassment of a mind, and then a red apple inside the mind. But if the redness is not a part of your experience, where the hell is where is it? How do you get to it, right? How do you get to it if it's not a part of your mind? Where the hell is it, man, right? Oh, man. The avenues you potentially go down when you're suffering from naive realism is ridiculous. Claiming you have access to something that is outside your mind. How the hell can you access? It's like saying you know what's going outside. I know what's going outside my house. If I've never been outside my house, how could I possibly do that? At least there needs to be some kind of picture representation on the walls of my house in order for me to have anything to say about what goes on out there, right? But still, those representations on my wall would not be the thing outside for obvious reasons, right? Because they are not outside, they are on this side, right? And it's the same with the mind. You have representations. Classifying them as a representation is axiomatic. You can't derive from the experiences that they are representations. That doesn't work. It's bad argument, right? It doesn't follow from the experience. That's something you can only get to by deciding to go there and say, no, I can reason my way to it, but I can decide to treat it as such, right? I think that's something that I have been warming up to very much during the last couple of years, using axioms in your philosophy. It's like, no, you should be able to argue for everything, and then just, throw around words until suddenly some word that you like and seemingly proves this pops out of this word juggling. I don't buy that, right? Be very, as soon as you get a sense that I think that we are just throwing around words here, be up in arms and say to yourself, I would advise that, right? No, I don't buy it. right? You can't reason. It's possibly why Immanuel Kant called one of his most important books, as I so have heard, right, Critique of Pure Reason, right? There are limits to what reason can get you to in philosophy, but that doesn't mean you can philosophize in a way where you say, okay, exactly because I can't reason my way to it, I can just decide it to be that. And if you disagree with my axiom, fine. Then we don't need to interact with each other, right? You go that way, I go this way, right? And so on. I mean, isn't that what people are doing when you are actually thinking about it, right? People are working from, you could say certain axioms, right? Even though that's not what they are basically saying, and they're not philosophizing about it. But they are actually working from some kind of axiom that this is the case, right? Like he is implicitly doing by, saying, I have access to something that is not in my mind, right? That's an axiom. That's not something he has reasoned his way to, right? How the hell could he do that, right? And particularly, he uses his mind to reason. And that which he's reason about is outside his mind. How the hell can you reason his way to it, right? But that's not, if you think of it from a government kind of approach, right? Let's just take that as an example. There's not just one government, even though there might be some powers in the world who would very much like there to be only one government. So there are only a couple of politicians that need to be, corrupted, right? Other than instead of having 180 different countries where there are basically thousands of politicians that needs to be corrupted in order for the elite to have control with humanity, right? So, of course, there's globalists who really want to get rid of all these politicians, or even, control them into buying them off and controlling. If they can control the monetary system, it doesn't really matter who's the head figure of that corrupted economy, right? They are bought into submission, you could say. These kind of, I'm thinking of Justin Trudeau in Canada, who's the son of, Fidel Castro, right? It's axiomatic in the sense that, yes, you can live over there, but we have another set of axioms over here. So we are living, it's forced from childhood, so they're staying within their tax farm and so on, right? But you could possibly move to another tax farm, right? And if you like those axioms better over there. But why not make a virtue out of there are as many potential combination of axioms as there are human beings in the world, right? This thing that, after the fall of the Berlin Wall or the East-West paradigm in Europe following the late 80s, right? 1989 or whatever it was, the wall came down, right? That was also running up period of, the buffer states of the Soviet Union. They went, independent and so on, right? Like, I don't remember exactly, but there was down in Yugoslavia, that there was, Czechoslovakia that became Czechia and Slovakia, and the three Baltic states became independent. So that was sort of a fewer people within the same tax farm, and they split those tax farm into 2 or 3 new tax farm. Why not keep going if that's the way to do it, right? Why not keep going all the way down to an individual person, right? Because, for instance, he's sitting here as an individual person telling you about his experiences or what he believes is, the way things work, right? There's not 1,000 people speaking at the same time. There's one person speaking at one time, right? So why not make it one person who decides what axioms you need to work from? I bet you cannot reason your way through everything, what you need to go through in philosophy. And that might be a pointer why philosophy has been grounded for many years now, because people are trying to use word to argue and reason their way through everything in philosophy, and it has been confused on a impossible plane, right? So I would say the only way to get forward is to get a perfect reduction base and then use axioms as necessary through your philosophy until you reach a perfect moral principle. That's what you need to do, and that's what I'm attempting to do in my book that I hope to get more time. I'm really putting it off a bit, right? I'm doing a bit, but there's a certain hurdle I have to get through here, and it's like, oh, it's a mountain of philosophy I need to do, right? And I need to get it right, and it's sort of a hurdle, and one day soon I will climb my way over it, right? It's a big hurdle I have to get through, right? And there's a lot of thinking on it. So I'm sort of like, oh, I'm putting it off a bit, right? Because I'm very much driven by my passion for something, right? I'm living up to Hume standard. It's passions that drive the thing, right? Okay, let's go in.
If I try to attend to my own mind, I don't find any redness there. No, the redness is just out there on the surface of the apple. And in the case of pain, when I'm in pain,
I mean, you have just listen to how ridiculous it sounds, right? It is out there, implicitly meaning it's beyond my experience, right? And there he is referring to that experience of red, which he claims is outside his experience, right? I mean, what level of convoluted abstractions do you need to live in order to claim you have access to something you claim at the same time you do not have access to, right? Maybe not directly, but at least implicitly, right? And because it's implicit, it sort of eludes detection by him and people like him, right?
There's certainly a quality of pain involved, but it's not in my mind. If I've hurt my toe, the pain is down there in my toe. That's where it is. It's not in my mind at all. And similarly for all the other examples of phenomenal qualities, they don't think of them as being mental at all. They think of them as being...
So how do you know there's a pain in your toe? If it's don't you need to be aware of it using your mind? Right? I mean, how does this work, man? And you need to be clear about this, right? You can't say, yes, it's outside my mind. That means it's outside your experience. But you are experiencing pain, right? How can you both not experiencing pain, be experiencing pain, and experience pain, right? How the hell does it work, this? It's ridiculous, man, right?
Being firmly rooted in the objects, in the external objects or in the parts of the body with which they're associated. So this explains why I call them Mephistos. I call them Mephistos because they deny that they are phenomenally conscious.
Yeah, but that's a report. Mephistos. I don't care what you call them. You could call them politicians, right? Whatever. They have no mind, they have no brain, they have no empathy, right? They're sick people. Or academics, maybe, right? But you can't get to that which you are claiming you are. You can claim, words are cheap in this sense, right? Ah, yes, I know this and I know that, and we're in this thought-up situation, this and that. Thought experiments are not there to give you some insight you do not have access to in normal, everyday, right? Let's say. It's just like the trolley problem. All of a sudden you know everything of what's going on in the whole world, right? Except that there's either this or that and make a decision, right? And in these thought-up situations that are either highly unlikely or impossible, right? You can't get to people's minds, right? And that's also a problem. If you know everything that is out there, how the hell can't you get to people's minds then? What is that? What is going on there? Why, if I'm experiencing red, let's say, right? And I'm not sure how you understand this, but let me say that I have an experience of red and I claim that it's in my mind. And you're sitting beside me. Why can you experience that redness that is in my mind? Only that which I could point at as being said, let's say, responsible for that red experience, right?
When we talk to them about phenomenal properties, about the what it is likeness of the experience itself, they just say, well, there isn't anything. All this, what its likeness that you're talking about isn't in my mind, it's out there in the world. And I call them Mephistos after Goethe's character Mephistopheles from Faust, who is the spirit that continually denies. It's a little joke. Okay. Now, of course, the Mephistos are going to have different explanations for things like perceptual illusions, where
There's also a slight, academic nudge, right? Yes, I'm using from Goethe. Yes, Faust and Mephisto. Sort of, you can sort of slap people a bit, like, oh yes, I'm always reading Goethe. I'm into that kind of. I know a lot about these fancy. I mean, it's not reading Goethe, right? But it's like it's all sort of a artificial smokescreen to get or illusion, right? He's actually an illusionist in this way. The illusion is that he's actually good at thinking, right? That's the illusion he was to create in you, right? That's rather the purpose of this thing, not to give you good philosophy, right? It's create an illusion that he actually knows what he's talking about, so he can continue being a professor, right? And being well paid to spout this bullshit, right? That's what his incentive is, right? He cannot possibly have the incentive that he's going to illuminate you, right? Or help you understand this, because he does everything he can to make sure that it's nearly impossible to understand what he means, in my opinion, right? And then they will just, use some kind of fallacious argument like, well, that's just because you are a lower level person who doesn't understand my big think, all right? It's like, and people they kneel down before these academics, right? Professors and so on, as if they're some higher being that they need to bow down to because, trust the science and trust the academics and so on, right? That's very sad in my opinion, right? And when you an academic and they are very polemic about stuff, right? They love throwing around words, right? Because they are basically, it seems to be, in love with their own word creation and how fancy they find themselves talking about these complex matters, right? And using all these fancy terms they have learned in university and so on. Basically there's nothing wrong in getting a higher, deeper, or better understanding of how things work. But you need to start from yourself, right? You can't let other people tell you what to do, right? You have to get there by your own accord. Otherwise, you are just somebody else's tool, right? How would you know the difference? How would you know the difference between a sophist and a philosopher, right? If you don't have your own philosophy and understanding of this, how would you put one and, what's it called? Split the rams from the sheep and so on, right? Oh, there's an old saying in Denmark, right? But never mind. I forgot my train of thought there. I forgot. Okay, let's go hit in.
Where we
oh man, I mean, just listen. Okay, man, right? Maybe you should have, if you have some speech impediment or something like that, maybe you should seek some help. If you're sitting there stuttering through 10 hours of lectures, right? It's fucking annoying, man, right? You sound like Bugs Bunny choking on a carrot, right? Man.
Seem to see something that isn't there. So if I seem to see a bright red apple, and there isn't a bright red apple there, where is the redness? if the Mephistos say, well, it's not in our minds, where is it? They're going to have some explanation for that. Maybe they will say, well, it wasn't really there at all. There wasn't any redness. I falsely believed there was redness. My
Oh man. I mean, just out of curiosity, and please let me know, my listeners. Right, you are very silent. Please respond to this. And I'm also losing. It's like that. My listeners or subs are falling off one by one as I plow my way through this deconstruction. Right, and I can to some extent understand you. Right, that this is getting sort of tiring. It's sort of, but okay, this is hardcore philosophy. I have never told anybody that this is pop philosophy, right? This is hardcore philosophy, and I have a sense that's what I want to do, right? And if you don't like it, I'm good with that. Please, I mean, don't feel that you're wasting your time listening to this, right? I just find these fundamental stuff, it needs to be dealt with very precisely, right? And pointed out all the flaws in the kind of thinking, right? I mean, I have lost all contact with his argument now, right? There are people who have these Mephistos. They have minds like ours, but they do not think of themselves as acquainted with mental qualities. What does it mean that they're acquainted with it, right? But they have them in order to be acquainted. You can't say that they could be acquainted or implicitly allude that you could be acquainted with it if you don't have anything to be acquainted with. So they must be there, right? But they're just, it's like, at what point is this argument so ridiculous? You have to say, well, I can't use this, right? I mean, I use my qualia all day long, basically, right? If nothing else, at least my vision. It's not like I say, well, I don't really need my vision. I close my eyes and walk around outside. I need it all the time, man, right? Why the hell would I call it an illusion? Which is basically saying I shouldn't take it seriously. Otherwise, what the hell do you mean by an illusion, right? And you could also argue whether or not illusion is actually a very good term to use, because illusion is something that pretends to be something that it isn't. But that which it isn't is not an illusion, right? But because you have an experience you call an illusion, that experience, you have no reference to what that experience is based on. So you can't call it an illusion because there's only this experience, as I pointed out several times, right? When he goes around in abstractions and thinking and drawing from memories and prior experience and so on, right? It's as if he taps into some other reference to what is going on, but he doesn't. It's all ultimately based on experiences, right? So illusion is a very, very bad term to use in this connection, in my opinion, right?
My eyes lied to me and told me there was redness out there, but in fact there was.
And you can also in that regard, you could say that his lack of sensibility towards what is a good term to use and staying with a particular term, even if it's a bad term, right? Not just bring in new terms all over the place, right? As regularly a new idea comes up, Mephistos, what the hell is that, right? Now there's acquaintance with mental qualities. What is mental qualities compared to phenomenality and datum? But it's just now there's this big pile of words that ultimately must be overlapping somehow, but because it seems like he's just using them as if it's understood what it is. And you might be confused into thinking that he's actually talking about aspects that are different. But to me, they're basically all words for the same thing, right? So he's confusing using terms. That's lack of sensibility towards using specific terms rigidly is also a red flag that should, warn you that this might not be very good philosophy, right?
Wasn't any. It was just my eyes lied to me. And also they're going to have different explanations for the fact that things have look different in different lighting conditions, say. Maybe they say that things just change their colours in different lighting conditions. but things don't have a single stable color. Anyway, so they're going to have to do some to do a bit of philosophy on this to make this.
No, but it's still a color, right? It's still a color. That it changes doesn't change that it's a color, that is particular kind of qualia, right? That the qualia's quality, let's say, changes doesn't change that there is a qualia. It doesn't matter if the elephant is brown or gray or green or whatever, as long as you identify it as an elephant. The quality of the qualia is not that important. The important thing is your abstractions or your conceptualizations among these qualia into, for instance, an elephant or a tiger and so on, right? At that point, when you have cognized tiger, it doesn't matter if it's green or brown or orange, right? It's that it's a tiger that is important, right?
This position coherent, but it's the one they find most natural and that they actually apply in introspection. If we ask them to introspect these the what it is likeness of their experience, they just say, well, there's nothing. The what it is likeness is out there in the world. And so for them, they have a version of the hard problem too, but it's not explaining how their brains give rise to phenomenal properties. It's how the surfaces of objects give rise to colours in the qualitative sense. How these, when scientists study objects, they find surface characteristics of the surface that reflect light of certain wavelengths and absorb light of other wavelengths, but they don't seem to find the colours.
Light and wavelengths, these are all abstractions, right? These are all abstractions and theories and, whatever, right? They're not direct experiences. So the takeaway is he's living in his abstractions, right? He is living in abstractions. And, when you're going to university or high school, whatever, at some point you learn to accept a learning of new abstractions, right? Mathematics may be the best thing to point to, right? You don't experience mathematics, right? You learn an abstraction of numbers and calculations and symbols and geometrics and so on, right? It's not something you can go out and find somewhere. It's purely mental abstractions and mental manipulation, right? So this might also trigger you into thinking that the real thing, the important thing is the abstraction rather than the direct experience, right? And maybe to some extent it is, depending on the situation and so on, right? But ultimately, philosophically, it is all derived from experience, direct empirical experience, right? In the now. You can't experience a car yesterday, for instance, right? You can have a memory of an experience of a car yesterday, but you can't experience a car yesterday, right? You can't experience a car tomorrow, right? It has to be now in order for you to experience it. It's very fundamental, right? It's elementary, Watson, right? So, and these sharp delineations of time and space and all these things, these have to be settled in your metaphysics. He's just jumping right into it and talking about colors, illusions, and done it, right? It's a dysfunctional kind of philosophy he has going, right?
It's the actual redness. And so they have a problem. It's not the mind body problem, it's the problem of the surface color problem. And similarly for how pressure waves in the air create sound qualities and so on. But it's not clear that problem is a lot harder than the...
You can't experience pressure waves, right? Pressure waves is an abstraction based on some experience, some qualia, right? They are. You don't have a sixth sense and a seventh sense where pressure waves arrive, right? You have something you feel, and then you classify that in an abstraction called a wave, right? You can't experience a wave. Yeah, you could say the wave on an ocean and so on, but that's also an interpretation, right? What color does a wave have? What sound does a wave have, right? It doesn't have any of these things. There has to be some kind of qualia which you then abstract something from. And that's what you refer to. But as I have said so many times now, you wouldn't have that abstraction if you didn't have the qualia first. And that's why you can't reject qualia. In fact, I find the qualia to be possibly the most important aspect you have to deal with in philosophy.
Than the hard problem, or any harder at all than our version of the hard problem. And here's a nice paper by Alex Byrne from 2006, Colour and the Mind-Body Problem, which imagines how the history of philosophy might have been different if we'd taken this view.
Now, color is just one of five senses, right? Or one of five types of qualia, right? What about sound, taste, and feel and smell, right? What about those? Well, yes, I agree that vision or colors are possibly, you could say spatiality, but that might just be, in my opinion, it is something that the mind creates. It's a scaffolding on which the colors are placed, depending on how the mind recreates this, right? I know it's as if the mind is you what eludes you into thinking that you have access to something outside your mind is that it feels like it manifests immediately to you. Not like there's a sort of delay and the mind has to create as soon as you turn your eye, there is yourself. As soon as you turn out, there is my window. It's not like the mind just have to put it together, right? How it works, I don't know. I mean, just because it's hard to fathom doesn't mean that you can create contradictions or paradoxes in your philosophy just because you don't like the idea, right? So, as soon as there are contradictions or paradoxes in a philosophy, it needs to be rejected, in my opinion. You need to do better than that, right?
Of qualities and thought of them as externally located rather than located in our minds, and he presents versions of philosophical views about consciousness translated into that way of thinking. It's a very interesting paper, and I recommend it. Now, the moral of all this is that if it is possible to conceive of your mental life in the way that Mephistos do, as transparent, with all the qualities outside in the world, rather than inside in your mind, then that is another way of introspecting. It's another way of seeing your own mind, as it were. And if that is possible, then how can we be certain that phenomenal consciousness is a datum? Because it's not a datum for the Mephistos. The Mephistos are offering another way of another introspective self-conception. How can we be sure that they're wrong and we're right? There is an alternative. Now, of course, that doesn't establish anything. It doesn't establish that the Mephistos are right. It doesn't establish that illusionism is right. But it just shows, but it just casts doubt, I think, or casts some doubt, or opens room for doubt about the claim that phenomenal consciousness is a datum, something that cannot be questioned and has to be taken as a starting point. Okay, so that's the datum objection. Let's go on to another objection now, which I've called the zombie objection.
Okay, maybe it's a good idea. I just thought of this the other day because he sort of has these sections of particular objections. It might be a good idea to keep them separate, not to chop them up so they're one half of one and one half of another in one part, and then the next second half of that and a new half of the next one in the next part of mine. So maybe it's a good idea, even though we are not just at the 40-minute mark, to keep this to the next part, right? So try to have an objection in each of the parts going on further here, right? So but thank you for staying with me so far. Those of you who are, would you mind, please let me know if you're still listening, right? Leave me a comment, do something, or give me a shout on the board, right? It's very quiet at the moment, I have to say, right? And maybe I'm my own quietness is not encouraging people to speak up, right? But I still have 217, 18 subs at least, right? That's better than nothing. Um, and I really appreciate you for sticking around and taking time to delve into hardcore philosophy, and that's what my channel is about. I don't want to sing. I mean, I can understand if I create a studio and fancy lights and a statue of Socrates and whatever, right? And whatever you do in these kinds of homemade studios, right? Um, but it would just be something that would start to look weird, and I would have to spend more time creating the studio than actually taking care of and buy expensive stuff and so on, right? And at the moment, I'm saving up to buy myself a decent turntable. I was so stupid like 2 or 3 years ago. I had a fairly good, with a great cartridge and so on, a good turntable. And I was a bit old, but it was sort of a vintage, high-level stuff, right? Something that would cost at least $1,000 to, buy again the same level of quality, right? But I was stupid, and it tipped over, and I destroyed both the cartridge, and it was completely ridiculous. And I was like, okay, fuck it. I'm not doing record. I don't want to spend 1,000 plus just to get back to where I was back 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm sticking to CDs, right? But as time has gone on, I go a lot to find secondhand stuff, right? Both music and movies and books and so on, mostly music, right? And I have bought a lot of vinyl. And I was just the other day, I was sort of running through my vinyl collection, which is about 200 records at this point, right? And these are just, what I have sort of off the handle, as sort of, oh wow, that's that's a good one, good quality or original pressing. Let me have that one, right? So it's sort of what I have bought because I can't help it. But now I have so many vinyl records that I'm sort of, and I was checking what does it cost to get a sort of a second-hand newer turntable, right, in a decent quality, and it's like it's fairly cheap. It seems like there are a lot of people who are sort of went on the wagon with vinyl like 3 or 4 years ago, and now they haven't really used it, right? And they are sort of possibly streaming, right? And there are actually a lot of good quality, both preamps and good new modern turntable. I was like, okay, I think I'm going to save up to a good quality second-hand, fairly new turntable, and maybe exchange it with a better cartridge, possibly, right? Usually those that come with the turntable are not in that great quality. It's okay, but it's nothing great, right? So I'm sort of I would rather spend money on that. Use my very few donations to whatever I need to, whatever software and hardware and, small things here and there in order to get this channel going, and then spend my hard-earned money on maybe getting to a turntable solution fairly soon, right? But that's just, a little comment on my sort of what I'm, boxing with at the moment. But otherwise, share, like, and subscribe, please, if you would, and help me at least get some traction, hopefully, and maybe somebody out there, somebody else if you know somebody who's sort of that guy or girl might be interested in some hardcore philosophy, please share it, please link it, please, help me out, right? I mean, all 218 of you, if you don't mind, I would like you to help me, get a bigger, as big as it can get without me having to do some fancy stuff, right? Otherwise, see you in the next one.